Today on the Workplace Makers podcast, I talk with Fiona van Graan, who is a corporate coach working with C-suite leaders, about the challenge of leadership as a workplace maker. Where often we're dealing with complex programs, projects in a range of changing priorities with people upwards, sideways and downwards who we're influencing and leading, and not always with that formal acknowledgement of leadership. And so there's a few tips and tricks that she helps us to understand, some fascinating insights into what it takes to be a great leader, and a few kind of shortcuts essentially, or at least frameworks that will help to frame your thinking and get you to a place of great leadership sooner rather than later. So welcome, Fiona van Graan, to the Workplace Makers podcast. It's fantastic to have you. And I'll introduce you to our audience, and we'll be so keen to hear more about your experience with leadership, working with C-suite coaches, with C-suite leaders as a coach, and getting into some of the implications of leadership in the workplace and what people can learn about that. So you're a coach, you're a corporate coach, and you're helping C-suite leaders translate their business goals into language and behaviors that inspire and bring out the best in their people. And you have this background in business psychology, and we're going to hear a little bit more about what you've been doing in the last few years. Great to know you have this incredible background in linguistics and a range of qualifications in psychology, neurolinguistic programming, and executive coaching. So welcome, great to have you on board. And tell us a little bit about how you got to this corporate coaching role that you're in now. So you've previously been the course director for the Leadership Trust in the UK, which has a really interesting history. Tell us a little bit about the trust and the experiences that you created for leaders, and how you've got to this point of being a corporate coach now.
Yeah. Well, the Leadership Trust is fascinating. It was started by two ex-SAS guys. They entered the corporate world and were a little bit horrified by how dry and intellectual the leadership training was. And they thought, you've got to throw people into leadership situations and give them that context, that stressful context, and see how they respond so that they can learn about themselves and other people and how they are responding. So it was fascinating. We would have, it was this constant exploration of people's characters, and we would have people from totally different walks of life. I remember a guy from the Lancashire Wildlife Trust sitting next to someone very senior in Barclays Bank, and I saw them size each other up on the first morning and look at each other kind of disdainfully and think, what am I going to learn from you? And they actually became fast friends. They retained contact afterwards and shared each other's leadership challenges, and because they came from such different perspectives, it was really helpful to both of them.
So fascinating. So really experiential leadership training. And you mentioned the stress that that is part of the context of leadership. So how did you create those stresses, and what kind of experiences were people having there?
We would put people into groups and each exercise, we'll call them that, was a different leadership challenge. So they would someone would take the leadership role. We would assign that at the last minute, so no one knew who was going to be the overarching leader. And then they had a time frame that was very tight and a challenge that was tough that they had to work out along the way. And then they would debrief afterwards and talk about what they did well, what they did badly, what they learned, and take that learning into the next project.
Amazing. And how did you see people change in that time? What were some of the standout when you think of some people who went from a low base to a high base, for want of better terms? What did it look like for them to be really transformed as a leader at the end of the week?
That's a great question. Everybody's different. So people think, I don't think I'm a leader, or I'm a great leader, or I'm a bad leader. But actually it's just finding out what's authentic to you. And that's what happened through the week. So people would gain more and more awareness of themselves and their impact on others, and become better at using that. And generally it was people who started arrogant that came out of the week with the most learning, because they heard a lot more from other people than they'd ever heard in the workplace before. And it humbled them, and it also gave them the motivation to become a better leader. We
Fascinating.
had letters from people's wives sometimes saying, I don't know what you did to him, but thank you so much because he's much easier to live with. So it's all about people learning just how to interact better with other people.
Brilliant. And you know you're onto something when it really translates into the home environment. It's not just something people can put on at work, but they've actually genuinely changed as a human being. How incredible. And so, digging into that a little bit, because you've really spent some time talking with C-suite leaders and understanding what their goals are and their motivations. What are some of the things? So, I think that people who are working in workplace programs actually often struggle to understand C-suite leaders and to know what is it that's going to be interesting to them or it's going to motivate them.
Yeah.
And so, what are some of the things that you would say people need to do to manage upwards when they're thinking about what senior leaders are concerned about and what they're motivated by?
I think it's important to know going in that senior leaders by necessity have to think at a different level. So they are thinking more strategically, they're thinking more about the future than the average punter in the business. They have more at stake in those things. So the most important thing is to learn what is it that they care about and what keeps them awake at night. And you can't know those things without asking, but how do you ask? Because that can feel a little bit dangerous, a little bit too personal. And there's two keys, I think, to asking. And these are actually key in any relationship, but particularly when you're leading upwards. And they are just being warmly curious. So going in with curiosity, not judgment, not I've got an axe to grind or I've got something I want to make sure you hear quickly. And being respectful. And that means asking for permission to ask questions, because you can't know without asking the questions. How do you ask the questions? First of all, you ask a question, can I ask? So I'd love to hear what it is that you feel is most important at the moment for this business. Would you be willing to tell me a bit about that? And then they can say yes, rather than you throwing the question at them and them sort of thinking, oh my goodness, I have to get my brain into this. And I didn't really want to talk about this right now. So ask permission and be curious.
Great. And so what's interesting about those is they sound like they're strategies for creating a safety net for that
Yes,
person. And
absolutely.
often we're in this situation where you feel like the senior leader has so much power that actually you feel like any small bit of attention you can get on your issue is it is what you're looking for, and you feel like that's such a minor deal in the space of everything else that leader is dealing with, whereas in fact there is that potential for that leader to be potentially threatened or taken out of their comfort zone. And yeah, it's really creating
Because
a safe.
they're people too, and they need to feel like they have other people's support. And they will talk because there's so much on their minds. So if you can give the right context, you can get a massive amount of information out of them. But it has to be on their terms. It has to be that they recognize you are supportive and that you're willing to hear. You're not just trying to get that little piece that you have to get them to hear really fast into the conversation, because they sense that. They sense that you've just got something to say, and
Yeah.
they'll probably just give you the chance to say it, but actually it's got no context around it and they won't see the value in it.
Yeah. I think this is so fascinating and will be so useful for people. And what it reminds me of is how is an executive team I've been working with recently who've said that often what people are arriving at their table with is a predetermined set of plans, and they're really arriving there looking for a rubber stamp,
Yeah.
and that's the extent of the involvement they're looking for from their C-suite. So for you, what do you think is going through a leader's mind when they see something turn up as a fait accompli, and now they're saying, just rubber stamp that for us, approve it so we can get on, and you'll give us the funding?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, it's frustration and disappointment. If you're going to give them value, you're going to do it through connecting with them. And a predetermined list that you're going to try to bang out as fast as possible is not connection. But we all tend to do that when we're under stress. And when you're approaching a senior leader, there's stress there and there's a sense of intimidation. So it's getting past that, knowing that they are human, knowing that there are things that are very important to them and you want to get onto those things. And that's
Great.
actually the same in any leading in any direction. Leading upwards, leading sideways, leading downwards. The
Mm.
first most important thing is knowing these are people. So it's people before process. If you can't connect with a person, there's no point jumping into the process.
Fantastic. Such great advice. Such great advice. Thank you so much. Let's talk a little bit about what it's like to be a leadership coach. So, do you find that people have stereotypes of leadership coaching? What's the classic stereotype?
Yeah. The classic is either that because they know I've got a psychologist background, they'll say, so are you reading my mind right now? Or they'll say, they'll imagine, and this sort of slips out in the things that people say. They imagine that they're going to sit down with me for an hour and I'm going to give them the golden keys to leadership, and then it's all going to be good, and they'll go off and apply those, and they'll be amazing. And so I have to help people understand that, firstly, to take a helpful analogy, you don't get fit by going to the gym once. It's an ongoing thing. And secondly, you have to feel like you have ownership of your issues. You can't have someone else to just tell you what to do, which people are hungry for. We think that'll help. We think that if we just get someone to tell us, how do I fix my problem, it's all going to be great. But actually that gives you someone to blame because they're not you and they don't know exactly how you should be doing it, or what's authentic to you. And it also doesn't help you feel like you can be confident in doing it your way and approaching it with skill, because you haven't really seen that you have the skills. So coaching is about helping people just take everything out of their brain, put it on the table, and put it back in their brain with more of a sense of understanding and purpose. I often say to people, it's taking the spaghetti out of your head, combing it through, and putting it back in.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's fantastic, and what a great avenue to do it with someone who's neutral and not actually involved in the work, the content of the work, but you're like this kind of extra avenue, this additional support external to the work that you can provide. And so, what do you think is the role of corporate coaches, leadership coaches, with project and program managers, where they're often, like you said, influencing upwards, sidewards, and downwards. And so they're not always formally recognized as having a leadership role or being a leader within the organization. And yet they can be dealing with incredible complexity under quite tight constraints. And so where does corporate coaching kind of fit into that picture, do you feel?
It helps people to get past the barriers that they often come up against. So I think one of the barriers that people often find in that kind of role is the sense in other people, I'm being managed, I'm being controlled. You're telling me the program, you're enforcing it. No one likes that. So helping them to find avenues that aren't doing that, and that takes the connection first. So thinking through who are these people that I'm leading, sideways, upwards, downwards, and what motivates them? What causes them fear? What lights them up? So how can I link those things to the program that I'm putting in place, or whatever project I'm leading? And that does take thought, and it isn't necessarily the first thing a lot of people think, because a lot of people in those sorts of roles they love projects and that's why they're there. But they always find that they have more understanding people than they think they do. When they sit down and talk about it, they go, oh yeah, this guy thinks like this and that guy thinks like that. And I've just realized that I could approach this person in a different way from how I've been approaching it. And that's come out of their understanding. They didn't even know it was there.
Fantastic. So it's really, helping them surface the insights and awareness that they already had, and being able to look at that and then use it, being able to take it then into normal working life and have a useful tool through that experience. So there's something really interesting in what you said around that knowledge of other people and their styles. And I know that in our conversations previously, you've talked about the importance of that self-awareness, which came out in how you described the leadership trust, that people were becoming more aware of their own authenticity. So what is it that people need to understand about themselves to be able to be a great leader and to be influential, upwards, sideways, downwards?
Yeah, great question. Probably it can be summarized in two things. One is what makes me tick, and the other is how do I respond to stress? Because everybody changes their behavior under stress. And if you don't know how you react to stress, you will hurt people and without realizing it. And that's hard to come back from. You know, in the workplace, in any context, trust is such a valuable commodity. And when you hurt someone, you really undermine trust, and that takes a long time to come back from. So if you know how you respond to stress, you can even warn people ahead of time. Look, I know that when the pressure's on, I'm going to start getting pretty dictatorial. Please don't take that as me being dictatorial. I'm just stressed, and I'd love you to come back to me and say, look, you've just barked a command at me and laugh at me, and let's talk about it. You know, I didn't think that was the right command. Can we talk about what was our priority here? How are we going to approach it? You know, if people give the permission to go there into places that are taboo unless they've given permission, like notice that I'm managing badly and let's laugh about it and chat about it, then you can get so much more traction in interacting.
So interesting. And so do you feel that those same strategies are the tactics or tools or ways that people can use to then build trust when it's been broken? So there's something very interesting there around the fact that trust does take a long time to rebuild. And it certainly takes longer if the person's doing the same thing and hasn't changed their approach in any way. Whereas I imagine if someone, you know, a leader starts to sound a little more enlightened and a little bit more aware of other people and how they're coming across to other people, that's a powerful way to build trust.
Yeah, that's right. And this sort of touches on psychological safety, which is a great concept that Google actually picked up and did a lot of research on that was really practical. You know, how can you create a workplace that is psychologically safe for people? And if people have found you dangerous, that you've undermined them or, you know, you've belittled them loudly when you're stressed, say, then if you're not showing any self-awareness of that, of course they're going to continue to be scared of you. They don't want it to happen again. So one of the key things to do is apologize. I'm really sorry that I came across that way. I really didn't intend that, and I really value what you do. I don't want to treat you like that in the future, and I'll aim not to. So that's opening a doorway to letting them see that, again, you're human, and you're recognizing they're human, and you respect them as a person.
Powerful. And you can see, you can just imagine how then there's a choice that the other person has a choice in how they respond. Will they accept the apology or will they hold the grudge? And at least the door's been open to the potential for a better relationship. Yeah, fantastic. That's so interesting. How easy do you think it is for leaders to take this on and to actually apply this, you know, to apologize for having made a mistake or been dictatorial?
Yeah, that bit, specifically that is one of the reasons that coaching is really, really helpful for people, because the first impulse, I think, for pretty much all of us is that that's too scary and dangerous and we shouldn't go there. Don't show weakness, you are the leader. But all relationships only work if they're mutual. So leaders are often very willing to put out their hand to support other people, but they're not so willing to put out their hand to receive support. And yet that's not mutuality. So when they think that through, when we all think that through, we are braver in showing vulnerability. And vulnerability is a very powerful thing to show. And it's not showing weakness. It's not showing, you know, I feel terrible at this job, any of our insecurities. It's just acknowledging that we don't get things perfect all the time. And that's okay. And that gives other people permission to not be perfect all the time too. Someone who's wonderful with this stuff and has a huge amount of research behind it is Brené Brown.
Brené Brown, yeah. She doesn't. And if there was a book to start with of hers or a podcast to listen to, what would be your top pick?
Oh gosh, there's tons of books, and I think you just dive in because it's all the same sort of concept. So just grab the one that floats your boat immediately. You know, if one of those titles, which are all pretty self-explanatory, if they spark your interest, grab that. It's a way into thinking about vulnerability. And she's so valuable because it's not something that's been talked about a lot in the workplace. I think another thing that hasn't been talked about nearly enough, and I'm on a kind of crusade to keep it being talked about more and more, is kindness, which is linked to that whole, vulnerability. But I think it's almost part of what I've been saying all along here, that if you are kind to the people around you, you build trust, you create a safe environment, so many great things are spin-offs of that. People are willing to go the extra mile. They're willing to throw themselves into challenging projects that maybe they would have been too scared to try. They're willing to cut you some slack if you don't do things perfectly. Because you've set up kindness, they want to be kind back.
That reminds me of an article I read a few years ago now in Harvard Business Review, I believe. And it was about helping culture.
Right.
And this company that had deliberately engineered a helping culture through making it part of people's job descriptions, incentivizing it, looking at how much helping people had done when they were being set up for a promotion. US company, I believe, could have been global. And they found that there was a spin-off effect for innovation.
Right.
Yeah.
That's interesting. And that's one of the bases of the concept of psychological safety. The whole purpose of making a psychologically safe workplace is not sort of pink and fluffy. People sometimes think, oh, kindness and being nice to everyone, helping. Well, I want to get business outcomes here. But actually, those are the things that create the business outcomes, primarily because it creates a safe environment for innovation. If it doesn't feel safe, if people feel like they might be barked at or belittled, they're not going to take any risks, and therefore no one's going to innovate.
And how do you see that changing in the future? And I know that's, there's so many considerations in that question. So when you think about where the workplace is at now, the stresses that people are facing now, but also the opportunities that are ahead of us, and what technology has provided, what a whole new way of working has stimulated people to need to face, and those are just some of the things that we're dealing with in the workplace. Are you hopeful for this potential for for growth and workplace cultures that are more kind, more innovative, creating psychological safety, displaying greater self-awareness? Yeah, what's your take? Are you inspired for the future of great leaders, or how do you feel?
Yeah, so inspired. I think this is an amazing opportunity. COVID, all of the stuff that came with it, just turned everything upside down, tipped it all out, and gave us the opportunity to think about what are the key things here, what is actually most important. There were so many old traditions in how work was structured and how workplaces were structured. They were just done that way because they were always done that way. And now we have the opportunity to say, well, was there value in doing it that way? And if not, why would we do it that way? How else can we do it? And I think as lockdowns have come and gone, and we've progressed through the stages of shock. Oh my goodness, working at home, how are we going to get everyone mobilized to do that? And what are the psychological and social implications of that? We've done a lot of teeth cutting on all of that. And now we're at this beautiful point, a lot of places in the world, I think New Zealand's probably going to get there soon, of having a blended approach to work where there's much more flexibility. If people want to work at home, great for part of the week, but they also value coming into the office because there's so many things that they've really missed during lockdown. And businesses are saying, Zoom works, it's great, but there are times where we have to be face-to-face with clients. And so it's this wonderful opportunity to say, again, we're all human. COVID, if anything, if it showed anything positive, it was we are all human beings. We could all get this. So how are we going to manage that? So it really humanized everyone, and that's just a beautiful platform for moving forward.
Incredible. That's so fantastic. And so when you think about the current challenges, I guess, that are facing the workplace, when we talked there about, you just talked there about creating those that organizational awareness, like that people are now more aware of the psychological and the social implications of both being together in the office and being remote and working from home. To come around to my question, it's really, there's something about the business case, establishing the business case and developing that organizational awareness that seem to go hand in hand. So what can be challenging is actually to prove the benefits on the people side, or to really encapsulate them and describe them. Then you need to be able to say, this exactly is the psychological impact of not getting people together, for example. And this is what's going to happen socially when people are 100% remote. That can be quite challenging to put descriptions around that, to put a number on it, to fund support for the people side of workplace management, leadership, transformations. Do you have any advice for people who are trying to put a business case together to support the workplace?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's going to be tons of stats, research, studies coming out. I'm sure there are lots being done now. I know of a few, but the longer time goes on, longitudinal studies will show fascinating outcomes, I'm sure. And just anecdotally, it's blatantly obvious, and people talk about it a lot. So a lot of my clients, so I work mostly one-to-one in coaching terms, but I work with a few businesses, so coaching various people across the businesses, and they're all saying the same things about their people really needing that social connection, and how that has diminished their people's understanding of how they link into the rest of the business, their sense of purpose waning, therefore their motivation waning. So they have to get people together to re-spark that sense of, why am I here and how does it fit in with everybody else? And just hearing the general conversation that arises, say, when you're in the office, someone walks past your desk having a conversation about something that actually is really important and links to your role. You don't get that overhearing when you're on Zoom. So people talk about how a lot of that important learning is not there at the moment, particularly with younger employees, and where people have come in during lockdowns. So they haven't even been into the office, they haven't met other people. Their managers are all saying to me, I've got to get these guys in. I've got to get them talking to the senior guys. I've got to get them hearing the language that's used around the office and the way that we think about stuff, because they need to be kind of initiated into that way of thinking, and I haven't been able to put it in their heads with just me talking on Zoom.
There's all these subtle things that people almost imbibe about the culture, isn't it? Just appreciate it, absorb it, don't even necessarily realize that these are our ways of working. But 6 months later, you could potentially ask someone and drill down to the details, but they're not necessarily going to pick that up. They're just going with the way that things are in the space and in this culture. Yeah, it's fascinating what's coming out around that onboarding, bringing new people on, and those serendipitous meetings, those happenstance occasions that are so that's where the subtle things are the informal things are outlined, and you can write some of these things down, but a lot of it you wouldn't be able to formalize, and even formalizing it would either become redundant at some point and irrelevant, or people would question it, or it might even come across as being inappropriate. So a lot of the time it's not formalized.
That's right, and a lot of it is hard to articulate, which is a kind of a good challenge, because values, for example, have always been hard to articulate, but crucial, really helpful to be able to get to the point of articulation, because then you can say to people, our values around here are XYZ, particularly kindness. And so for self-aware leaders and leaders that are, or not even necessarily yet particularly self-aware, but just have a kind of learning mindset that are hungry to make their businesses better and better. COVID's been an amazing opportunity for that as well, because they've realized, I've got to up my game. I've got to be able to convey culture to people over the phone. That means telling them what it is, not just letting them experience it. And I've got to ask people questions about how they are, and I've got to get a sense of how their motivation is without watching their work. So there's been a lot of honing of all of those nuanced interactional skills.
Yeah, fascinating time, like you said, full of opportunity. Fiona, I know you have a real strong interest in linguistics and language and the power of words. Is there something that project and program managers can do around their language to inspire and bring out the best in people?
Great question. Firstly, I think there's a massive amount they can do, and it's consistently that there is impact you can have with your language. So we're all leaders. If we walk into a room, we have an impact, and that's leadership. And using that impact intentionally is what we're talking about when we're talking about leadership and good leadership. So program managers, they're at a level where they have a very wide influence. So even more important to be aware of language. So one of the things I'd say is never, ever complain about the company or gossip about other people. And that doesn't mean not acknowledging issues or problems. You can talk about them in a sober, grave way. You can talk about challenges, you can raise them, but you have to speak about them optimistically, because otherwise you're undermining so much. Your success, you're undermining. You're making your life harder for yourself if you talk negatively about problems.
Fascinating. Fascinating. That's so interesting. And that's something I think a lot of people would struggle to do. So it's
we all do, because on the spur of the moment, we just want to vent and we want to say that guy was really irritating me, or, I can't believe the company made this decision. But if we do that, we do make a rod for our own backs, because we've just raised negativity that we're going to have to deal with later. So if you keep an optimistic, future-focused approach, you model that for other people, and you also create an environment that is so much more, so much stronger, so much more focused on how do we achieve what we want to achieve. It doesn't matter who's to blame. It doesn't matter that everyone's characters are different. People rub each other up the wrong way. That's normal. That's life. But how are we going to get through this together?
And are there any other pointers or guidelines, I guess, that people need to pay attention to in the way they speak, the words they choose when they're leading upwards, downwards, and sideways?
Yeah, I think the key thing is know the values of the business. So if you know the values well, you can put them into your communication, and you will naturally, because it's just how we do things around here. You communicate according to how we do things around here. So it's being able to speak in a way that's consistent with the values of the business. And if there aren't values, because often people haven't articulated them, then make them up. And you don't necessarily have to say, these are the values of this business. You better not, because they haven't been agreed by everyone. But if you have that mindset of, I want to talk about positives, what are the positives about this place and what we're here to do, then you will, again, just have a sort of values-driven conversation at the ready. And as I've said before about kindness, I would always put kindness in as one of the values that will smooth the way for successful leadership. So being kind includes using language that is respectful of people, assuming the best in people's motives. Nobody tends to wake up in the morning and think, I want to wreck the business today. So if they have done something that looks like it's going to wreck the business, it's probably a mistake. And so approaching them according to what you know of them as a person and the things you value about them is going to be the best way to help solve that problem and help them see that they're not a mistake as a person. They just made a mistake, and we can work this out.
And so as we think about what we've talked about, and I just wonder if there's anything that rises to the surface for you as a shortcut for people. And I know this is a kind of cheat answer, because like you said, you can't go to the gym once and expect to get fit. So yeah, is there anything even approximating a shortcut for becoming a great leader?
I love that question. It's such a cliffhangery question. Is there? And my answer will be less exciting than the question, but it's yes and no, actually.
Okay.
So the yes is because a lot of the ways that we can get better as a leader are counterintuitive. So if you pursue those ways, you will get better quicker than the people who are just reading leadership textbooks, for example, which are useful. They give structures, they give kind of ways of thinking about leadership, but they don't give you that personal understanding, the authenticity, the honing how you interact with other people. So it's the stuff like, how do I react under pressure? And even asking other people, how do I react to stress? Which is a brave thing to do, because you don't really want to hear what they're going to say. But if you ask those kinds of things, if you initiate conversations on things about you as a person, rather than talking strategy and tasks and projects, then you will get quicker. You will get better at being a leader quicker. And the no is, it does just take doing that stuff. You can't wake up one morning and say, I'm going to be a great leader today, because in the next 5 minutes you'll undermine your own intent.
Yeah. So you sound like someone who knows human nature quite well. And
I'm familiar with it.
Yeah. And so just before you go, I know you love to cook, so tell us about a meal you made recently that you really enjoyed, or a meal you ate recently.
Okay. Something I cooked recently, stunningly successful, which I love. I love it when people are really excited about what I cook and when they go, oh, this is amazing. And it was unexpectedly a brilliant combination of, so it was a chocolate mousse made
Nice.
with roast beetroot,
Wow.
chili, and dark chocolate.
Wow.
It was incredible. Highly recommend it.
I need that recipe. Can we put that in the show notes?
Yeah, probably. I have a tendency not to use recipes, but I'm sure we can come up with it.
Oh, you did say you hate recipes. Yeah. We'll try and approximate something. And Fiona, before we go, any final words for our listeners on leadership and being a great leader?
Oh, that's a great question too. Well, I don't think you can go wrong if you start with we're people. People are your most valuable resource, and that's because they're animate, and that's because they're human. So they are motivated by their hearts and their minds, and unless you understand or focused on getting more and more understanding of their hearts and their minds, what do they think about stuff? How do they feel about stuff? What lights them up? What stresses them out? All the things around, and understanding, do they actually understand what's required of them in the role? Do they feel like they have a purpose in the business? If you don't understand any of that, you're really going to struggle, because you're not connecting with the person, and then you're just giving them a task list, and nobody loves a task list without any context around it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on the Workplace Makers podcast and sharing your experience with leadership, and being able to draw from your rich insights has been incredible. So we've got 20 plus years of experience here, and these are insights that you've spent a lot of time developing. So I'm thrilled that we can benefit from it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Such a privilege.